Hi, it's Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. I'm here with an August wrap-up, and so kicking off, well, first of all, I should apologise. I didn't read any books by women in translation, even though August is Women in Translation Month, and I blame my TBR because the fact that I finished reading all the books on my TBR, it was a little bit empty, so I just didn't have any to pick up. But let me know if you have been doing Women in Translation Month and any of your highlights, because I'll go book shopping. So the first book was Tell Me What I Am by Mannion, and this was a book club book. I had to read it because we were doing it for the Adelaide Writers Week book club, and I thought the cover looked a bit bleak and the description sounded a bit bleak, so I was a bit apprehensive, but in fact I really enjoyed it, if that's the right word. But the blurb is, it's Dina Garvey has gone missing, and her daughter, leaving behind a daughter, Ruby, who was 4 when she went missing, and her sister Nessa, and they're the two main characters, the two protagonists. Ruby has gone to live with her dad, Lucas, but from the beginning we suspect that Lucas has something to do with Dina's disappearance. He's, I guess, the third main character, and his mother, Clover, so Ruby's grandmother, also lives with her and Lucas, and she's a really interesting character as well. So we have Nessa's perspective, and she goes back in time to when Dina and Lucas got together and how that relationship unfolded from Nessa's point of view, and then Ruby's perspective as she grows up. The question on the blurb is, what happened to Dina Garvey? And of course I feared the worst, and it is indeed quite a dark subject matter, a dark story about a coercive, controlling, abusive relationship. And so that I feel a bit, I've read books about that subject before, do I need to read another one, and so on. But in fact it's a different angle and it's really engaging. The writing is very simple and it flows really easily. It's really cleanly written, and I think what was interesting about this is that the characters are so engaging. So Ruby's a wonderful character, and to see it from her point of view was something different. And also Lucas is depicted in a nuanced way, so it's not a caricature. And Mannion has spoken about how when she first wrote the character of Lucas, he was a caricature of a controlling husband, and it was just too obvious, and he had no redeeming qualities, and she just thought in real life these men are often, they get away with things in society because people either see some good in them or they're fooled by the facade or for whatever reason, but you have to have a bit of nuance to it. So it was interesting to hear that she went back and wrote in some of these scenes. You know, he's educating Ruby at different points, and not completely bad. Yeah, but of course that doesn't completely redeem him, but it's, really well told. I enjoyed it. Enjoy might not be the word, but I found it very compelling, couldn't put it down. So I was quite immersed in it, and I think she's a great writer. So that's Tell Me What I Am, a good book club book because there's a lot of discussion that it generated. Then on to a book by Ella Baxter, Woo Woo. This is Ella Baxter's new book, and it was an auto-buy for me because I loved New Animal, which was her debut novel. And also Jacqueline from Hill of Content Bookshop had given this rave review, and it's actually worth looking, if you follow her on the socials, worth reading her review because it's so well put. I couldn't put it better, but at one point she says she wants to eat the book, and that's also referring to one of the scenes in the book, but she says it really well. So of course I was going to buy it anyway, but it did not disappoint. And this is the story of Sabine, who's an artist, and don't let that put you off because I don't love books about art often, although with some exceptions, including Girl in a Pink Dress by Kylie Needham is an exception, and there are others, but often it puts me off a bit. But this is so well done about the art world, and really satirical and visceral writing, and really captures what it's like to be an artist about to open an exhibition. And at one point she's trying to express, Sabine is trying to express what it is for her, and she says the truth was Sabine was on her knees for art. And I loved that expression, and it goes on, and the whole book is like that. It's so strong. The writing really brings it to life. And the other thing that's happening, and the reason Sabine is having this meltdown, and her gallerist says hell is an artist 3 days before their exhibition opens. But in fact, the other reason that is behind all of this is that she's being stalked. So there's a stalker, a menacing man standing outside her house watching her and leaving notes, and it's really terrifying, based on something, or inspired by, if that's the word, something that did in fact happen to Ella Baxter that she mentions briefly in the acknowledgements. And this is coming from lived experience, and it is really well told. And the other element that layers over all of this, and that is one of the reasons it feels very fresh and contemporary, is that Sabine, as an artist, is online a lot as well. So when something's happening, she's experiencing something, she'll start filming and uploading as it's happening. And that leads to some very funny results, because her followers are not necessarily picking up on the fear or the darkness or the reality of what's happening, but they're seeing it as a work of art sometimes, and often their comments are very inane and very frivolous and completely at odds with what's going on, and it makes it this uncomfortable humour, but very on point humour that Ella Baxter manages to do. So that's one of the reasons I think I like her writing, is that it's tackling dark subjects or uncomfortable subjects, but with humour. And I think some people can't manage that, and she manages it brilliantly. So not a book for everyone. Annie and I have just recorded the podcast, which will go up this week, I think. But Annie said the same as me. She wants to recommend it to everyone, but at the same time recognising that it's not a book for everyone, because it is strong, it's visceral, it's feral, you would almost say. And I mean that as a compliment, in the way that Charlotte Wood describes it in her book, The Luminous Solution, about the creative process, where she says the writing has to almost be a bit feral to capture if you want the writing that actually comes to life, that has life in it. And I feel that when I read this book. So let me know if you've read it, but I thought this was brilliant. So that's Woo Woo by Ella Baxter. And the next book is Death Under a Little Star by Stig Abell, and I DNF'd this. It's not a bad book, it just wasn't the one for me. So it's about Jake Jackson, who's an ex-police officer, and he leaves his wife, or they leave each other, and inherits an old house from his uncle in the country and goes to live there. There's hardly anybody in this place, but he happens to meet an attractive woman who lives nearby, who's the local vet, and starts pursuing her in a sort of very gentle way. And the other thing that happens at the beginning of the story is that they discover some old bones as part of a treasure hunt, and the point of the treasure hunt is to look for a bag of bones, but they're meant to be not real bones, but these are in fact human bones, and there's a mystery as to whose they are, and it transpires it's a woman who was killed or accidental death, but then they suspect it was a murder, so they go back and investigate what happened. And I just didn't love it, because it's one of those books where it's from a male perspective, where all the women characters are love interests only, and in the case of the vet, she's also a bit of a sidekick, but and there's nothing wrong with that, except it feels a bit tired to me. And the other thing was that the action is very slow moving. So it is described as a meditative, sort of beautifully written murder mystery, if that's the correct genre. And so that's clear from the blurb or from the reviews. And I did appreciate that. There's a lot of writing about nature and his surroundings and the houses that they go to, and it's very carefully written, but overall to me it was a bit twee, a bit sentimental, and I just didn't love the depiction of women. So I DNF'd it, but let me know if you've read it. I know that it's been very popular. According to these blurbs, it's meant to be absolutely brilliant. So I might be in the minority with that one, but that was a DNF. And then I picked up this really interesting small book by Carys Davies, who I haven't read before, but I've always heard good things about her work, and it's clear. It's a small novel, it's only that short, or novella you might say, and it's set in a very remote island at the northernmost tip of Scotland, so past Orkney and Shetland, I think. It's a fictional island, but around the Orkney and Shetland Islands towards Norway. And there's one man, it's set in 1843, there's one man living on the island. He's, I think, literally the only person living on this island, and you can only access it by boat, and hardly any boats ever stop there. And then there's he's one of the characters, and then there's a minister who's left the church in Scotland and been one of the ones starting up the Free Church. And he's given this job because he's now lost all of his income and he needs to earn some money. He's asked to go to this island as part of the clearings, which was a real thing that was happening around that time, where the landowners were clearing land and putting sheep or crops on the land and just moving on the original inhabitants. And so this island was one such place. And our minister is asked to go to this island and clear it, so bring the man off the island, basically clear him off. So that's his job, and it doesn't go to plan, and he ends up being sort of washed ashore in such a way that the man living on the island, I think Ivor is his name, has to look after him. And so they form an odd couples or unlikely friendship, even though they don't speak the same language, because on the island there's a particular language that Ivor speaks. And then the third character is the minister's wife, and she's left behind in Scotland, but she's worried about him. And so it's very short. It's one of those books that is a bit like Claire Keegan, really profound, very cleanly written, and every sentence carries weight and is not a word is wasted. And there's so much going on between the lines. And I thought each character was so strong and individual and really beautifully depicted, the subtleties and the, the moral dilemmas, if you like, and the making you look at this sort of thing, which still happens in other contexts around the world, in a different way, or from each different character's point of view. And there's something that I'm interested, if you've read it, I'd be interested what you thought about how it goes towards the end. Some of the plot points I thought were interesting, but it was a very compelling read. I don't particularly love the idea of being isolated and being on a remote island, so that didn't appeal to me, but it is incredibly well depicted, so I'm sure a lot of people would love that. It would really resonate if you've been to that part of the world, I think. So that's Clear by Carys Davies. And then something very different, I read The Snakehead by Radden Keefe, and I picked this up because I loved Empire of Pain, which he wrote about the Sackler family and the opioid epidemic in the States. And his latest book, I think, is called Rogues, and it might even be a collection of articles that he's written, investigative journalism about rogues, and I haven't read that one. And this one I thought was a later one because it says published in 2024, but in fact it was first published in 2009. But that's okay, it's still interesting because it's about the snakehead trade, or the human smuggling trade, and in particular he focuses on the people coming over from China to America in the late 1980s into the 1990s and up to about the mid-2000s, or he published it in 2009. So that's the focus of it, but of course it then goes into the immigration system in the US, and that's really relevant at the moment with the US election. It does feel now a bit out of date because there have been so many developments in the attitudes in the US towards immigration, and different countries and different moments of xenophobia or prejudice, and other moments of being, compassionate and humane and bringing people in who are experiencing war and displacement, and all of those issues. He does cover that in the Chinese context, but it does feel not up to date. So I did wish that this was written this year, because it would be really interesting to read his take on all of those issues as they're playing out today. But his writing is so good, and I would love to see this adapted because it's really cinematic and the characters are brilliant. And as I'm sure he would say, you could not make this up. And in fact, there's a great review which says if you had Hollywood script writers chained to their desks, they would not be able to make something up like this. So the characters are what make it, I think, and the issues that still are very, very relevant, and just going behind the scenes of how some of those decisions are made about the policy and how the law is responding to real life events, and often it's sometimes a bit belated, and how people get caught in the middle. And there was one interesting thing that he said when they were detaining, so he covers the period where they first start to detain asylum seekers or immigrants who've come across without papers, and they start to detain them with this particular ship that runs aground. And he said the cost of doing that is, I think, if I'm correct, it was $1.2 billion per year. And he said that if you'd actually use that money or part of that money to fund more staff members who could process the claims, you'd actually get the legitimate asylum seekers. If you like, you'd be able to quickly process them and then deport those who are not legitimate or deemed to be not legitimate, and you wouldn't have to detain people, and so, or not for nearly so long. But of course, all the money goes into this detention, and I think the same happens in Australia. And I'm sure that there are answers to that criticism, and it's very hard looking from the outside. But that was a really interesting, just when you look at the costs. So all this money being spent, and is it being directed in the most efficient way? And just the way he writes, it's so engaging. So a really good read, The Snakehead. And that's it from me. They were my August reads. Let me know what you've been reading, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.